Like a backstage pass to the world of fly fishing travel, this is Waypoints, the podcast of destination angling. News and events, helpful travel tips, destination profiles, great stories, and expert advice from some of the most seasoned and experienced names in fishing travel. Waypoints is presented by Yellow Dog Flyfishing, the industry's #1 specialty travel company and the fly shop for the world of fly fishing. Freshwater or saltwater, international or domestic, Yellow Dog has you covered for your next fishing adventure. And now your host, author, photographer, and world traveler, Jim Klug.
Welcome to Waypoints, the podcast where we explore the journeys, destinations, and stories that shape the world of fly fishing. I'm your host, Jim Klug, and today we're diving deep into one of the most iconic and sought-after fish in all of saltwater fly fishing, the spectacular bonefish. Known as the ghost of the flats, the bonefish is one of the most incredible species found in saltwater, and for anglers, there is so much to love about these fish. From the environments in which they're found, to the way they readily pounce on a fly, to their unmatched 0 to 60 speed and raw strength, they may very well be the ultimate fly rod quarry. Joining us today to talk all things bonefish is someone who knows this species better than just about anyone in the industry. Fly fishing travel veteran, artist, trip host, and passionate angler, Ian Davis. Over the past 3 decades, Ian has chased bonefish in almost every corner of the tropical world. And now, after years of research, travel, interviews, writing, and fly design, Ian has compiled a monumental new book project titled A Passion for Bonefish, set for release in July of 2025. Ian's new book is more than just a technical guide, a how-to instructional book, or a large format photo essay. Rather, it's an in-depth tribute and homage to the fish, the people, and the places that have defined an entire genre of angling. From the flats of the Bahamas to the shores of the Indian Ocean, Ian's new book delivers a global perspective and a deep respect for bonefish, blending stories, science, culture, and decades of personal experience. Today, we're going to talk about the journey behind the book, the insights it holds, and what makes bonefishing such an enduring obsession. I will also remind listeners that Ian is my business partner in Yellow Dog, a co-owner and the company director for saltwater programs. Interviewing Ian is a bit like having my wife on the show, almost too familiar a situation for an average interview. But with Ian dropping his new book in the weeks ahead, it was the perfect time to have him as a guest on the podcast. And I can say with total confidence and certainty that few people in the entire world of angling know bonefish as well as Ian. So we'll get into it with Ian Davis and talk about all things bonefish right after a quick word from our sponsor. Waypoints is sponsored by Patagonia. To bring their gear to life, Patagonia is motivated by relentless curiosity and a passion for the wild. They evaluate hundreds of materials, build dozens of prototypes, and spend seasons punishing them in the world's most extreme conditions. The work is the guide, and Patagonia never tires of exploring, learning, and improving. Be sure to check out Patagonia's new Swift Current waders, repatterned and redesigned for bulk reduction, reduced seam stress, increased maneuverability, and improved repairability. Made from recycled materials without intentionally added PFAS, Swift Current waders move better in and out of the water. Ian, welcome to the program. It's good to have you on Waypoints with us today.
Thank you very much, Jim. It's exciting, and it's an honor to be on your show.
Well, congratulations, Ian, on the new book project, A Passion for Bonefish. Can you tell us a bit more about the project and what readers can expect from this new book?
It's an easy-to-read resource guide to the world of bonefishing. This subject has been written about for decades and done to such a high degree. I certainly didn't want to compete with any of those wonderful books by the legends of saltwater fishing. And so because of the interview process, it really is a resource book that the reader can jump from subject matter to subject matter. It does not have to be read from front to back. It can be navigated as you see fit before your next trip.
Well, talk to us. What was the catalyst for starting this project, Ian? And when did the idea for this book first begin to take shape?
I think it was just shy of a decade ago. Tom Perro from Wild River Press basically asked me to write the book. And it was because I had written a chapter on Andros Island for him for another book. And I think he liked my kind of the broad subject of the book was Andros is the land of the unknown because it's so big and has such a massive interior. I kind of talked about how you fly into Andros and you'll never fish the interior, which is somewhat frustrating. And I think he liked that angle.
Well, this book is working with Tom. It's part of a larger series, correct? The Passion for, I guess, trilogy, you would call it. Talk to us a little bit about that and the books that came before.
You bet. It's a passion series, and it's kind of the big three, the Grand Slam. And Andy Mill opened up a number of years ago with the Tarpon book, and that had a big influence on a lot of us. It was a new format, being interview-based and really diving deep into the brains of the legends like Stu Apt and Flip and all those legendary anglers that we looked up to as young anglers. And the educational aspect of it was unique and fresh. And that's what I really took away from it. And then Jonathan Olch followed up with his permit library. I mean, that's some heavy material to get through, man. But what a wonderful, wonderful piece put together. And both those books really inspired me to tackle this project.
Well, you're in rare air with these two. You got Andy Mill, who writes A Passion for Tarpon. You got Jonathan that writes a 2-volume Passion for Permits. And of course, everyone's saying, well, when is A Passion for Bonefish coming out? You're the guy that did it. Talk to us about how you kind of ended up putting this book together, how you ended up organizing it, and a little bit about the process from start to finish. Because, I mean, you had to feel, I don't think intimidated is the right word, because you're certainly the guy that's capable and should be doing the Bonefish project. But, you got Andy, you got Jonathan, and now here comes Ian with his project. Talk to us about that process and what it was like kind of launching this.
Yeah, at first I turned down the offer. I just didn't, think that I was the correct person for it, mainly because I'm not a saltwater guide. It's not what I do on a daily basis. But after a lot of thought and realizing that I do know and consider a lot of my friends authorities on the subject, it would be really fun and interesting to pull information from their brains on the finer aspects of bone fishing and the whole culture. And so that's what really got me excited about it. And I'll tell you, I was actually watching, some news channel like CNN or Headline News. And what it really dawned on me is that people nowadays are used to lots of different information firing at them at once. It's hard to focus on one subject matter anymore because we got our phone ringing, our tablets, our car talk to us nowadays. So there's all this different information coming to us. So the book is really written in that format that there's a lot of short jabs of information that you can pluck as you wish and take what you want from the book and leave a lot of stuff behind. And that also led to the fact that it took a long time to write. There's so much information to wade through. And I had a young family at the time, or still have a family at the time. We're really busy with work, and I was kind of relaunching my art career. And so there was a lot of other stuff going on. I had a lot of irons in the fire. And my deal with Tom from Wild River Press was, please don't ask me on the progress or status of the book, because then I'll burn it. So it was really had to be at my time frame, and that was absolute. That was the deal.
Well, it is an ambitious project. Talk to us. How long did it take from start to finish?
I'm not really sure. I would say 6 to 8 years.
Yeah. And you mentioned a moment ago about the people you reached out to contribute to this book. I want to go a little deeper on that. I mean, you had a lot of legendary anglers and big names that you've known, that you've fished with, that you're friends with, that you've spent time with over your many, many years working in the industry. Tell us about some of the anglers and guides you interviewed, featured, and have included in this new book.
Well, in a broad sense, not to give away too much in the book, again, being fortunate to know so many wonderful people and to traveled to the corners of the earth, meeting these people, and through the fly fishing shows all over the years and all the networking that goes on and the New Jersey show, and all that. It was, I considered these people friends. And I know once people dive into this book, they're going to be like, you didn't include Whoosy in the book. Why isn't this person in it? I should be in it. And the reality is I interviewed my friends. And whether it was Enrico or Justin or Bruce or, Dougie, these were people that I felt comfortable with. I didn't want to reach out to, and I even tried to reach out to some of the legends of the game that I didn't know very well. And it was uncomfortable and it just didn't feel right. So I had a deep field. I had a really good roster and I stuck with the people I felt comfortable with.
And you've got dozens of other people that have contributed to this book that you've interviewed, that you've taken their years of knowledge and their experience and their opinions when it comes to all things bone fishing. You've asked them to contribute in those ways. So in the end, is this book more of like a how-to guide, or does it focus on storytelling or the history or the destinations? What types of information can people expect to be covered and included in this book?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Coming up this November 4th through the 9th, join Yellow Dog Fly Fishing for an experience unlike any other. One-of-a-kind Belize Bluegrass Week at El Pescador Lodge. This incredible couples trip blends world-class saltwater fishing with nightly concerts featuring Grammy-winning bluegrass artists and top-tier pickers from across the U.S. We're talking serious talent, great flats fishing, and a private Caribbean venue. Guided fishing and non-angling activities during the day, and exceptional bluegrass music under the stars. A few spots remain open, and we'd love to have you there with us. For more information, give us a call, 406-585-8667, or email Matt at yellowdogflyfishing.com.
It's kind of a broad stroke of bone fishing. Again, I didn't want to get into the really minute specifics because that's been done. So each chapter is started off with somewhat of an amusing anecdotal story about the subject we're about to dive into that I wrote. And in fact, those are the only things that I wrote pretty much in the book, is each chapter opening and some intros and other material I couldn't find from other people. And so each chapter is filled with wonderful and colorful comments to poignant questions that I asked each individual.
And how many pages did the book end up being? I mean, if it follows in the footsteps of Andy's book and Jonathan's book, I mean, this is not a wafer-thin publication. I mean, this is going to be a phone book size volume, correct?
It is. The shipping on it will be astronomical. So, no, it's over 350 pages. A lot of wonderful full-page photos. Tom really wanted to highlight the photography as well, and when I was shooting all the photos for it, I was in a vertical format because the previous two books were vertical. And then when I saw the first draft, it was horizontal, which threw my brain for a loop. But he was right, because bone fishing is horizontal. It's landscape much more than some of the other species. It is about space and horizon. And so the horizontal format definitely worked better for the landscape photos. So that's that.
And knowing your artistic capabilities and your background, obviously you shot the photos, you've got a ton of great images in this book. I imagine there's some of your drawing and artwork that's been incorporated as well.
Yeah, with today's technology, I did a lot of doodles, and I'll tell you, and I don't feel it's cheating, because if Michelangelo had a projector for the Sistine Chapel, he would have used it. But I'll tell you that what you can do with an iPencil on an iPad is unbelievable. And so I spend a lot of time on an airplane, and I was able to do these super fun, I was a cartoonist as a kid, doodles that open each chapter. And I had a lot of fun with those. And I stole a trick from the New Yorker magazine from an artist named Hirschfield, where he would hide Nina's in all his drawings. So
the name Nina,
Nina,
which was like his daughter or wife?
His daughter.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's super cool because it's a very aesthetic name with the lines and the flow of how you write it. And Ian happens to be very similar to that. And my daughters didn't have that fluidity to their names. There was too many horizontal lines in it. You need a vertical flowing deal like water. And so I hid Ian's in all the drawings, and whether it's a doodle for work or for the book, I'm starting to hide Ian's. So and then Tom did the first round, and all my little drawings were so small and hard to see, and you couldn't find the hard to find Ian's. So I had him enlarge them a little bit, and now it's game on. So have fun with that.
Well, good. So people can search for those throughout the book, which is great.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, is this new book, A Passion for Bonefish, is it most suitable for beginners? Is it designed for experienced anglers? Who is going to benefit most from this book?
Yeah, the answer is yes on that. It's a broad stroke. It has a little bit of everything for everybody, from the most basic aspects of your first bonefish trip or day on the water to hopefully information that pertains to the most experienced angler. I think what people are going to really enjoy is the conciseness of it.
Well, when you're sharing your lifetime of knowledge, Ian, and then you compile that with dozens of exceptional, experienced bonefishing names, and whether it's guides, passionate anglers from the sport, you put all of that information cumulatively into one book, you're going to end up with something that is going to be a resource, whether it is for someone who's just cutting their teeth in saltwater and wants to learn more about bone fishing, or somebody who's fished all over the world, has a ton of experience. They're still going to get great takeaways from this. I mean, you can't help it with all the information and all the people you've included in this book. This is going to be a hell of a resource.
It'll be fun.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, for you personally, Ian, why bonefish? I mean, you and I have fished all over the world together for decades. I know what kind of angler you are. I know how good you are. I know that you get excited when you're casting to anything with fins, whether it's freshwater or saltwater. Chances are good you fished for it. You love it all. But why bonefish? Does bonefish for you as a species kind of hold a special place for you? Is there an obsession that has kind of built around this particular species?
I'd say first and foremost, it's where it takes you. You don't want to be cheesy, but, palm trees swaying in the wind. That Corona commercial, James Bond type, memory when we were kids, seeing Bond coming out of the water and his scuba stuff with the beautiful beach and the azure water. And the
smoking hot Bond chick who
I don't know,
happens to be on the beach as well.
Yeah, because that happens all the time where we go. And it projects you into a slow pace, a vacation-like feeling. And in our busy world today and our hectic lives, man, just, even just stepping out of the boat barefooted or slipping on a pair of booties, and you just don't need a lot of stuff when you're bone fishing. Being a trout guide and having indicators and split shot and rigs and swivels and different rods for different applications and losing a gazillion flies, to be able to, stick a fly, an extra fly in your hat, a spool of tippet in your pocket, and march out into the unknown of a flat is really refreshing and so simple and, organic to some degree. So that's first and foremost what I take from it now. But back then, when I first started, there was a lot of them. And I remember when you and I first permit fished with Andy Smith And you guys dumped me on Bigwood Key, and you guys went off on your own. And Andy said, just stand here and look at that rock. And in 27 minutes, a permit will tail. And of course, he was right. You just don't see as many. And it was a tough day on the water. Or tarpon fishing, you got a lean or you jumped one, and that was it. Bone fishing, they're dependable, and we can rely on them, mainly because they're resident. They don't migrate, and they're pretty much always there. And you can have a horrible day of weather, blowing sideways, rain, and man, if you're patient and you use your knowledge, you're going to have an opportunity. And typically those really nasty weather days result in super special moments and big fish.
Yeah. So for you on the why of bonefish, again, the places where they're found, the places it takes you in pursuit of these fish. And you also said something about the bonefish, and we often talk about how they're an honest fish. And I love that term when you apply it to any game fish. And the bonefish is really the definition of being an honest fish. When you do your job as an angler, when you make the right cast, when you have the right presentation, when you're fishing the right fly, and you kind of put together what you're responsible for as an angler, oftentimes the bonefish will reciprocate. They'll do their job by oftentimes eating the fly. And it's just kind of a good relationship between angler and this particular species, which is one thing that is absolutely so neat about bonefish. In terms of influence, Ian, who had the most impact for you personally, and who helped you along the way in becoming the bonefish angler that you are today?
I had a very fortunate upbringing in that as a result of something that's typically negative, like your parents getting divorced, I had two dads. And my mom, bless her heart, made sure those two dudes got together really well. And one was a Democrat from Harvard, and one was a Republican from Yale, which certainly created a lot of spicy dinner conversations.
Yeah, what could possibly go wrong?
Yeah,
in that
debates.
setup,
I remember getting kicked out of Bristol Bay Lodge dining room once with the two of them. But they were really good buddies, and they were just such a wonderful influence on me. And my dad was from Long Island, and he was a striper angler and loved, to go catch the biggest fish in the ocean. He got really into mako shark, and I have such fond memories of him dripping in chum and wiping it on his jeans, covered in blood, just loving it. And then my stepfather was a subtle, quiet fly angler. And so I had a wonderful upbringing of the exact opposite type anglers. And that gave me a really strong foundation for, growing up and becoming a fishing guide. And what's unique about, I didn't really know there were fishing guides. My dad's never hired guides. They did it themselves. And we didn't have YouTube and all these, books, or we didn't have the resources people have nowadays. And so having the ability to learn on my own through trial and error and organically, I think is unique nowadays. And then obviously when you start guiding and you really meet your friends that, kind of get you to the next level.
Well, who were some of the earliest bonefish anglers that you met? You graduated college, moved to Breckenridge, you began guiding, you opened a fly shop, you bought a fly shop, ran that successfully for years, and then you kind of got that first taste of saltwater fishing and destination angling. Talk to us about some of the earliest bonefish anglers that you met and how those early interactions helped shape your kind of obsession and addiction to this particular species.
Well, and this could be a podcast in itself, Jim. And you know this well. Jim was a manufacturer's rep. Our host was a manufacturer's rep and got together a lot of the shop people that worked in Colorado and made us a fraternal group. And whether it was through the whitefish tournaments that you had.
Oh, those were fun days.
Yeah, or traveling to destinations. We had a really strong network of buddies, and one of them was this guy, Morty. And Morty grew up with a guy named Keith Parr, who currently and still, or back then and still does, live on Andros. And so we had a backstage pass to Andros. We didn't have two nickels to rub together. We could not afford the all-inclusive lodges that we all like to go to nowadays.
And we were broke-ass fishing guides and reps and just trying to figure it all out back in those days.
Yeah, peanut butters and jelly and cheap beer. Right. And so we had an opportunity to go to Andros for nothing. I mean, I remember the flight from Fort Lauderdale to Andros was $40 round trip. And we used to just sit there and watch the flight costs from Denver to Fort Lauderdale, and we'd go at the spur of the moment. So my influences, again, were people who didn't know what they were doing and learning by trial and error, which, again, is so unique. Whether it was Crosby or Harkins or Duncan or you or Lowry, we learned from each other through trial and error, which just doesn't happen nowadays. And then we were lucky enough to meet the right guides. Yeah,
and that, Andros, I think for a lot of us became the proving grounds and really our first introduction to the world of flats fishing, going down, trying to figure it out. But we finally got smart, started hiring guides and got to meet these incredible, I would call them legends of the sport. At the time they were younger, but, the Andy Smiths and the Charlie Nemors, the Smith family, so many people that we all learned from and obviously influenced us in such a huge way. And a lot of these guys are still great friends today.
They are. And we certainly didn't want to be perceived as, poaching their economy. Because we were guides ourselves and shop owners, we definitely wanted to, give back financially. And I remember saving my, 20% of my guide tips would go to my Andros Guide Fund. And so we could hire these guides. And what I really learned quickly was you get to fish all day. When we were, wading those oceanfront flats on North Andros, it was all tide dependent and there was so much downtime. And that's what really irked me and made me mad because I wanted to fish all day and catch as many fish as I could. And you couldn't. You had to wait for the tide. And so having the ability to chase optimal tides throughout the day with these guides who were in the same position that we were. They were our age. They were just starting their businesses and had to make a name for themselves. And what's cool is that they accepted our business because we had to fax them. There was no email. They didn't have phones. They would give you like 4 different phone numbers where, pissed off women would answer the phone each time and ask you where he was. And so it was hard to book a guide day, let alone know if he was going to be on the dock waiting for you. And so we got really lucky getting in with the royal families of bonefishing.
Yeah, we were all in our early 20s. We were figuring it out, and like you said, they were starting out, and it was just a wonderful learning experience from a lot of these guides who are still great friends today. Let me ask you again: do you remember your first bonefish? Where it was? Do you remember that moment and what impact that moment had on you as an angler?
You bet. Again, we were very fortunate people. A buddy of Keith's named Winky had a sailboat, a catamaran. And Jim used to organize these kind of early hosted trips, but with all your buddies. And I think it was $750 is what we had to pay.
For a week.
For a week.
Yeah.
And I think we went to the Jolters first, and then the second one, we went to the South Bight. Land of the Giants, as they called it. And so Crosby and I were up late fishing off the boat and slept in. And you guys all took met the guides or had a skiff and went out fishing. Crosby and I woke up with very dry mouths and looked out over the water, and we were in the middle of nowhere with all deep water, and it was 10 in the morning. And there was a Zodiac hanging off the back of the boat, a little inflatable raft with a 2 or 4 horsepower engine. So we jumped in that, and we're not small humans. It's amazing it stayed afloat. Anyway, so we there was a spine flat that we had seen the previous day, and we went over there and waded, and I was in way too deep water. I didn't know what I was doing. I was in like thigh deep water walking, and I looked over to my left at about 10 o'clock, and there was a floating eyeball. And upon further inspection, there was a fish attached to that eyeball, and I made a simple roll cast, and the fish just about ate it off the surface and took off running, so I didn't have time to trout set, and that was my first bonefish.
That was the first bonefish on Andros.
Yep.
Back in the day.
Yep.
Well, let's get back to the book. Let me ask you, You finally wrapped it up after years and years of working on this project. What would you consider the hardest part of putting this book together and making it all happen?
Finding the time to dedicate to the book was my biggest challenge. And then secondly, evaluating the interview content. We had so many interviews and such long, drawn-out answers. You ask Stu Apt about something, he'll go on. And so there was a lot of information to wade, and we had to get that in typed format, which, obviously, technology helped us with. But evaluating that information and then organizing it and editing it, because we didn't want long drawn out answers. The theme of the book is conciseness and being quick, short jabs of information. And then once we got the proper information that was concise, we had to put it in specific order. And so once we kind of printed out the first version of the book, the task of organizing the information so that when I would ask a question, it would read organically and naturally was really challenging. And I didn't know even how to begin that because I'm not a computer wizard, and cutting and pasting gets really convoluted. And so what I did is I took the Monday Night Football John Madden strategy of sketching with different colored pens and doing arrows and circles and scribbles. And then my daughter Sophie worked for us, and she transcribed all that or reorganized it in typed format and sent it to Tom. And she got some school credit for it or whatever. So a big thanks to Soph for handling that, because there's no way I could have done that. It's so time consuming. It's
a big project. I mean, again, this is not a 60-page, quick read. This is a volume that I think is going to end up as one of the all-time great publications in the world of fly fishing literature. I mean, it is a big, big book, and it's full of information. Do you think that your fundamental understanding and appreciation of bonefish behavior, Ian, changed as a result of this book project and organizing all of these different interviews and all of this content from people who are super accomplished in the sport, who have really done well with bonefish over the years in amazing places? You interview them, you put all this information together. Do you think that kind of changed your appreciation of bonefish in the end?
Of course it did. It had to. Being an artist, I'm always, I accept constructive criticism very well, and I'm a sponge. Any good angler has to just absorb as much information as possible and increase that data bank of fishing information. And so how could you not learn from these wonderful people and apply them to your techniques on the water?
Have you found, like, just in the last couple years, some of the advice that these people shared or the techniques that they found effective, you have found yourself applying that in recent trips and being like, oh, God, this has kind of upped my game a little bit. This has helped.
Absolutely. And more importantly, conveying that to our guests in the boat. You host a lot of trips as I do, and, we're not doing a lot of angling. And so having more knowledge that we can pass on to our guests is the true value of people fishing, and sharing information is paramount.
Yeah. What do you hope readers who buy a copy of A Passion for Bonefish, they read it, they absorb this information, what do you hope their key takeaways will be from this project?
Well, obviously they're going to learn a lot. It is an educational manual or resource guide, but I think what's most fun about the book is the conflicting answers. Being a dyslexic kid that didn't like school very much, I can tell you I had to figure out ways to do things that weren't textbook. And all the textbook answers have been provided in the wonderful books throughout the history of fly fishing. So what I think is cool is there's a lot of different ways to catch a fish, or skin a cat, as they say. And so having the ability to provide different answers to the same question, I think is unique and fun.
Well, we've always said that, whether it's bonefish, permit tarpon, you get 10 of what might be considered the most accomplished anglers, right? Top of their game, the biggest names who found the most success over the years. You ask them the same 3 questions to those 10 anglers. you're going to get radically different answers. Even though they're all really, really good at what they do, they clearly know a lot, they're accomplished. It is a sport where you have a lot of different opinions, right? I mean, that is the name of the game. And to be able to capture that in the book is, I think, something that's going to be really, really neat for the reader, and it's going to provide some amazing takeaways.
You bet.
Yeah. Well, what I want to do now, Ian, is tap into some of your personal bonefish knowledge, some of the information you've researched, that you've collected and that you decided to include in the new book. And to make sure that these topics are relevant and helpful as much as possible for our listeners, I've actually based these questions largely on the most, quote, frequently asked bonefish questions and the most popular bonefish-related search terms on the internet. So we went through, we kind of scoured this, and as it turns out, there are a lot of people in the world looking for answers and information when it comes to bonefishing. So I'm going to tap into your personal knowledge base. First off, what is the best way to actually spot bonefish on the flats when you're out there? Let's say you're wading in fairly shallow water, you're wading on your own. What's the best way to spot bonefish when you're out searching for them?
You know, this is going to sound weird, but casually. People overlook and strain their eyes and get headaches. So first and foremost, buy a quality pair of glass sunglasses or high-res polycarbonate, whatever. You want good eyewear. And then secondly, you want to look for color change that's moving. I mean, I remember back in the day, we would be staring at a piece of grass for hours that we ended up calling Stony Boney because we would get so fixated on a rock because the water would be washing over it, looking like it was moving. And that's because our eyes were trained for trout. And so those are stationary objects that have a flicker of a tail. They're not moving through the run or up over the riffle. So it took us a while to learn how to see them. And those guides back on Andros in the early days in Ascension Bay, they really taught us to chill out, man, relax, and take in the whole view. Look in close, look out far, and scan the water with your eyes, but still treat the flat as a grid. And you want to check out each grid. And that's behind you. You know, you're going to get backdoored. So looking for color change, moving is, I think, the key. And you can also hear them, splashing and looking for pushing water. Nervous water is a big deal as well. So just being alert and aware and not overdoing it.
Yeah, not overstraining or overthinking anything. Tell us, what does the term tailing mean? Now, we might have some new listeners, people that aren't necessarily familiar with the world of saltwater fishing or flats fishing particularly. Talk to us about what the term tailing means and how one should approach a tailing bonefish.
Yeah, I mean, that's game on. You and I don't eat all day. Why would a fish? Yeah. So when you see any fish actively feeding, it's exciting. And when a bonefish tails, it's only doing one thing, and it's rooting its prey out from its environment. And you've all seen crabs when they hide in the sand or a shrimp hides in a blade of grass. They're protecting themselves by not being seen and digging down. And so those bonefish have to root them out, and that's why they have that rubbery nose. So when they're tailing, they're showing themselves to the angler because they're rooting out and feeding. And they're also not as aware of their surroundings. So it's a little bit of an opportunity to sneak a fly in a little closer to them. So when you see a tailing fish, take a deep breath and relax. Let the buck fever wear off and make an educated, well thought out cast. And you don't want to lead them too much, and you want to just kind of drop it anywhere from 6 to 18 inches in front of them, and you want a lighter fly. You don't want that fly to enter and go plop. You want it to gracefully land like a parachute Adams on Depew's Spring Creek. And you want to think Spring Creek tactics and be quiet because it's typically still when that's happening. And oftentimes when there's one tailing, there's a number of fish tailing. And the biggest problem with that can be is if the water's glared out, which is often the case, there's fish between you and that one tail. And you're going to blow them up when you lay that fly line and leader and fly down because you just didn't see those 6 fish that were between you and the tailing fish. And that's not your fault. That's just the game. So when you see a tailing fish, sometimes it's advisable to just be patient and wait and watch that tailing fish, because it's not cruising. It's going to stay in that area, and look for other fish that show themselves so you can, make a more educated cast.
So you just talked about cruising bonefish. Talk to us a little bit about the difference between a feeding bonefish, which could certainly be a tailing bonefish, right, and cruising bonefish. When you hear those different terms, define those for us.
Yeah, a cruising bonefish is, on the highway to the restaurant. The tailing bonefish is at the all-you-can-eat buffet. And so when those fish, and it's whether it's a permit or a bonefish, when they're cruising, you have to entice them. You got to throw them that morsel that they're not ready to eat. Again, we don't eat all day. Why would a fish? And so that's where maybe a little larger fly, a little heavier fly, something that does make some noise and create vibration to peel that single fish off a school. So when you see cruising fish, you got to lead them more. And you got to get that fly in their zone. And that can often be patience and not stripping too quickly.
So that's feeding and tailing. You just talked about schools of bonefish, right? Do bonefish behave differently in schools versus when they are, say, solitary? If it's a big bonefish, it's by himself on the flats, versus a school of 6, 12, 20 fish, whatever it is. Talk to us about the differences in bonefish behavior.
Yeah, it's just like you and I back in the day at the bar on Autech fighting over Busch Lights or Coors Lights. It's each person for themselves. Those fish are competitive. When you have a school of fish, the odds of you catching one increase because the fish literally can fight over your fly at times.
They get a little more competitive.
They are. It's natural selection at its finest.
Well, how do bonefish react to angler pressure or noise? I mean, anyone who's fished for bonefish know that they're, by nature a spooky, hyper alert fish. But talk to us a little bit about their reaction to pressure and noise.
Yeah, so we have to remember that sound and sound waves travel up to 10 times further and faster underwater than above water. And that means when that, when you see a tailing bonefish and your buddy opens the cooler or slams his pelican box to get his camera out or their camera out, her camera out, and makes noise, that alerts the fish. So when the guide or when you see a fish, you go into stealth mode and you want to be really, really quiet and everything's thought out and subtle.
Yeah, always aware of making noise, whether it's wading through the water, how hard you're walking, your wading boots on the flat itself, crunching coral, or, your buddy that picks that moment to dive into the cooler, crack a beer and slam that lid shut or drop the bottle opener on the bottom of the skiff. All that is going to have an impact.
Yeah, and, when you say angling pressure, I have found that bonefish that I don't think have ever seen a fly react the same as fish that have had a lot of pressure, angling pressure on them.
When it comes to noise
and presentation and vibration. So, obviously fish in the remote parts of Cosmolito Atoll and the Seychelles behave a little differently than, a town flat that's next to a settlement or a population of people. But generally speaking, if that fish is feeding and you get a fly in front of it without it knowing, it's going to take if it's in that feeding mode.
Yeah. Talk to us about times of day. All right. Are bonefish more active? And we're going to talk about tides here in just a second and that impact. But as far as times of day, is it, typically more productive early in the morning or late in the afternoon? Or is it not so important on the time of day as it is, say, with tides? Talk to us a little bit about that.
And that, again, that's a learning curve when you come from freshwater to saltwater that's hard to consume or understand. Because a lot of trout fishing or bass fishing is low light conditions early in the morning, the misty rising off the lake and you're fishing topwater. That is not the case in bone fishing as much. It's all about visibility and seeing within the water column. And it makes a big difference when the sun is between 10 and 2 for the best light. When that sun's low, the sun's rays and the clouds bounce off the water's surface and create glare, which hides the bonefish under that glare. So your shots are within 30, 40 feet. So you got to make a quick presentation with a roll cast and maybe one shot. Where when that sun's high in the sky, you have more time. You see the fish coming, and you can make a well thought out, proper presentation and a longer cast.
Yeah, and you touched on it a few minutes ago. I mean, the importance of really high-quality polarized sunglasses. I mean, part of being a successful bonefish angler is not just your cast and your delivery and your presentation. So much of it is about being able to spot the fish. And for those that haven't fished for bonefish, what makes them unique is that you're talking about a creature whose entire body is completely covered from the tip of their nose to the end of their tail with this network of scales, thousands of scales. Every which of these scales is a tiny little mirror. And so those little mirrors that cover their body reflects their surroundings. So at times they can look absolutely see-through or totally translucent if they're over, say, a very white sand bottom, or let's say they're going over darker turtle grass or a mottled bottom, that those mirrors reflect that. And so they go from looking almost see-through and translucent to very dark colored or dark backs. And it's really one of their strongest defense mechanisms. You talked about the spookiness of these fish. This is a species that is constantly in fear of being eaten because everything on the flats loves to eat bonefish. So they're trying to do their job where they're looking for their own prey. They're looking to eat. Well, at the same time, they're kind of constantly nervous about everything in the ocean that wants to eat them as well.
Yeah, and to touch on, how to see the fish, oftentimes it's the shadows you see. And I'll tell you, from 11:30 to 12:30, those shadows are smaller and skinnier because the sun's directly above the fish. So yeah, between 10 and 2 is awesome, except for that little time where the sun's directly above the fish. Because oftentimes, because of the reflective nature of their scales, accepting the surrounding hues of their environment, the shadow is what gives the fish away. So having that strong sun and clear water enables you to see the shadow, which again is back to color change and not looking for the specific fish, but color change moving.
Yeah, looking for the shadows. Now, we said a moment ago, tides. We talked about that. And tides have a massive impact on bonefish feeding behavior. I want to talk for a little bit about that. A question we get all the time from anglers, what are the best tides for bonefish? And obviously that's a hard one to answer, but in general, an incoming tide, an outgoing tide, slack tides, pushing tides, what's the best overall scenario for bonefishing?
You want to find moving water. You want a hard tide. Dead low and dead high or slack tide is typically not so productive. And that's where you want to locate that hard tide. And a lot of these fisheries are very complex. And you can have a hard tide just over there, about a driver and an 8-iron away. Where you're standing, there is no tide. And that's because of a creek or a channel that's feeding or pulling water from that area. And so finding that hard tide is where you're going to find feeding bonefish. And the reason is that current knocks food loose from its environment. All those little crab and their little crab condos, when that tide is ripping, they go out to venture out to feed themselves, and they get knocked off their little podium and go tumbling into the water column. And the bonefish are looking for that, because the food that bonefish eat are also feeding on the hard tide. So they're out and about looking for food. So that's when it's game on. So one of the aspects, and we'll get into this later, is choosing the right destination that has a variability of tides within a close proximity.
And is there a big difference between what are called spring tides, which are, for those that don't know, a spring tide is the highest highs, the lowest lows, the biggest fluctuations between high tide and low tide with lots of moving water. And then you have neap tides where, your highs are a little bit less, your lows are a little less severe, not as much of a giant fluctuation on those neap tides. So you got your big springs, your low neaps. Do you have a favorite when it comes to bone fishing?
I don't. I'm just happy to be out there.
Do you have a philosophy or an opinion on what's most effective?
Of course I do. Hiring a guide is going to solve this. But basically, if it's a neap tide, which means there's not a lot of water coming, or not as much water coming up on the flat, you're fishing more closer to the ocean and the deep channels, closer to the waterways that feed the flats. Conversely, on a big spring tide, which is around the new and full moon, those fish love those tides because they get to go into the backcountry where the mangroves are. And the mangroves are the all-you-can-eat buffet, Denny's Grand Slam breakfast. That's where all the food is because they can hide in the forest of mangroves. And so then you just fish back there further. So, theoretically, I guess, during spring tides, you need to gear up a little heavier because you're going to be battling some mangrove shoots and roots. Whereas on a neap tide, you can go a little slimmer because you're going to be fishing in more open flats.
Yeah, it's a little heavier leader and tippet setup when you're dealing with structure and obstacles where those fish are going to be found.
Yeah, and also during a big tide, the tides move faster and are more dramatic. So the low is lower and the high is higher. So when it's not flooding the backcountry, that water's rushing. So your prime time for pushing water is going to be a little quicker as well.
Yeah, with spring tides, you're going to have shorter windows where kind of all the action is happening. Maybe the fish are flooding onto the apex of a flat, right? Getting up into that spot that's only going to be flooded for a short period of time, or maybe they're all moving through a creek mouth to get back into the mangroves. You want to be in the right spot when that window presents itself.
Yeah, and what's cool is, if you're DIYing or you're wading on your own in your little, home flat neighborhood or wherever you've chosen to go, once you start to consume this information and you have success, the neat thing is, and we did a lot of this back on Andros in the day, was everything might happen tomorrow, but an hour later.
That's right.
And that's really neat because you kind of get to redeem yourself if you blow a couple shots.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because one question we get all the time has to do with tide charts. When people are planning a trip, they're always asking about the optimal tides, the right, days to be there. And tide charts are nice because in this crazy world of variables that we deal with as saltwater anglers, it's one of the few things you can look at with any degree of certainty or kind of lead time prediction. You're never going to know when you plan your bone fishing trip for, say, the coming spring, what the weather is going to do, the direction the wind's going to blow, what the overall factors are going to be in the environment. You do have a pretty good idea, though, by looking at tide charts of what your cycle is going to be during those dates. What do you tell people when they're planning a trip and they say, okay, I can only focus, for instance, on a spring tide week, or I only want these dates. That's the only time worth going. And we get that a lot when people are booking trips. Talk to us a little bit about looking at tide charts, how important that is, and what people need to consider. Because tides, again, they're one variable, but they're certainly not going to be the only variable that delivers a great week of fishing. There's so many other things we can't predict or control, but tides are one thing we can. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and this can be a really slippery slope. I mean, you could go into a dark hole researching tides and moon phase. And again, hiring a guide, they're going to get it done, pretty much no matter what the tide is with an expansive fishery. Yeah, there's some really skinny islands in the Bahamas or, specific pancake flats like back in the day in Los Roques where the tide is extremely important. But a lot of these fisheries are expansive enough where you can get out of a negative tide and find a positive opportunity. And so don't get caught too much on tides. And we'll talk a little bit about moon phases next. And I have a good story about that. But I would focus on when you can go and going for as long as you can. Because then you have a longer tide cycle within your time period on the trip. And I know it's hard to get away for a week, but when you really go for that week or 10 days, you're going to see just about every tide, which makes a big difference.
Yeah. And, I think it's important to remember that when you're fishing with a guide, they don't have the luxury of only being on or only performing during, say, a spring tide or a certain moon phase. They're guiding every day of the month. So they have a plan to get anglers onto fish, no matter what the tides are doing. That's what a professional guide does. You mentioned moon phase. Talk to us a little bit about that. Obviously, moon phases dictate what the tides are doing throughout the course of, say, a month. But how do moon phases affect bonefish behavior and feeding behavior, typically?
Well, I remember on Grand Bahama 15 or 20 years ago when I first visited H2O bonefishing, and I was hanging out with Greg Vincent, and I was, I asked him the taboo question, what's your favorite moon phase? And he said, 7-knot winds and bright sun.
That's the best moon phase, right?
That's the best moon phase.
Yeah.
And he's absolutely right. And, I remember talking to Andy Smith about it. And he said, man, yeah, the fish feed at night, but only here because it was incoming or outgoing tide. I fish where it was high or low when the sun was high and up, and it could be cloudy at night. So I'm just not, I was a moon phase guy and looking out the door, the plane for weather and all that. So here's an interesting story. I just did a hosted trip to Cuba, and, a lot of these prime destinations during peak seasons for diversity of species get booked up. And we planned this 2 years out, and I didn't have the luxury of choosing my moon phase or tide. I had the exact opposite of what I would want. We had a full moon on the first day of fishing and high tide in the morning. And this was a permit-focused trip. Exactly what you don't want. And we had 7 slams that week.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. You just never know. And again, tides, moon phases, they're factors, but they are certainly not the only factors. And I think that's really important when people are planning a trip to remember that there's a lot of things we can't control. And so I like Greg Vincent's answer, 7-knot winds and sunny days. That's the best phase right there, for sure. Well, I want to move on from talking about tides and talk specifically about gear and flies for bonefish. And I know this is one of your favorite subjects. So let's start with flies. What are some of your most dependable go-to fly patterns for bonefish and why?
Again, bonefish being an honest fish, I don't get too hung up on the specific fly pattern. I get more focused on diversity and quantity. You don't want to run out of that one misty fly that's producing, whether you took a nap at lunch and your buddy poached your fly box or you lost a couple on a spring tide back in the mangroves. You want to make sure that you have enough of the patterns to get through your time period or your trip or your week or your day on the water. And so having enough flies and then diversity to match the environment.
And you're talking diversity, you want size, different sink rates, different colors, that kind of thing.
You bet.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to put you on the spot here. You talk about having a lot of different patterns, having enough patterns, but you're going to spend the next, let's say, 5 years bone fishing all over the world. I'm going to give you 3 flies, 3 patterns. Now, you get different sizes, different sink rates, but you only get 3 patterns in your box to fish bonefish all over the place. What are those 3 patterns going to be for you?
Well, the gotcha, first and foremost. And the reason the gotcha is such a historically producing fly is it's basically just like the bonefish. It's a mirror. It mirrors its surrounding colors and environment. So you can fish it over dark bottom or light bottom and accepts the colors of its environment. Also, it's sparse. You don't want a lot of stuff hanging off your fly. You want your fly to be subtle because, again, everything a bonefish eats hides and uses camouflage or digs into the sand, and one little antenna is sticking out of the sand that gives away its location to the bonefish so it can go root it out and tail. And so having, that one little throat or whatever beard they call it on the fly just is that little subtle tail, and it's got just enough flash on it to kind of alert a bonefish from a distance. So it's got all the qualities that bonefish like. So that's my first fly.
The gotcha.
Secondly is the Enrico Puglisi spawning shrimp. I mean, he hit a home run on that one. And, again, like the gotcha, it's a very durable fly, which I really enjoy. I don't want to, one and done. I don't like that. I want to use this fly over and get my most value out of it financially. But the EP spawning shrimp, comes in a variety of colors, but really its slim profile has a really good sink rate and angle. And it's just got all the qualities you want in a really good bonefish fly. So that's number 2. Number 3 is a small crab or a crab. And bonefish love crabs. And I was on Andros this past winter. We had horrible weather. And what bonefish you saw were fighting the weather and the waves. And man, I just thought, man, all this waves and turbulent water are knocking crabs loose. And so I used a big crab, and that worked well. But one of my favorite flies that I always have in my box is a small, subtle crab, such as the EP micro crab. When those fish are tailing, or you're on a flat that receives some pressure, that thing lands so quietly and sinks so subtly, and then you just leave it on the bottom, and it's just a wonderful, spooky situation fly.
Yeah, so good lineup of your 3 favorites right there. I love it. The gotcha, the Puglisi spawning shrimp, and a small crab pattern such as EP's crab there. Talk to us quickly about matching the fly weight to the water depth and current. And again, let's go back to the gotcha, all right? Let's say you're fishing a size 4 gotcha. It's important to have different sink rates on that size 4 gotcha, typically defined by the size of the eyes, how heavy the eyes are, to be able to fish different depths, different flat situations, different current situations. Touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, I hate to say it. I would prefer to have 4 different weights for each category or style of fly. So let's say it's a gotcha. I like to have some bead chain eyes, which is going to enter the water a little quietly and sink a little slowly, and is best for shallow water because it doesn't have to sink so far. And then I like, and I'll get to why next, and then I like small dumbbell eyes because if it's really windy, your fly line and leader gets pulled on the water and it can yank that bead chain fly off the bottom. So small dumbbell eyes still enter the water quietly, but they stick to the bottom a little bit better in spooky, shallow conditions. And then I like, medium dumbbell eyes for, 2 to 4 feet, 3 feet of water in there. And then I like really big dumbbells on a size 2, and I kind of go gotcha clouser on that. I make it a little bit longer and a big meaty morsel. And that's for, big bonefish. Big fish want a big fly. And so how I choose the weight is based on water depth. And so if you're wade fishing, you're going to take bead chain flies or eyeless flies. You can also have eyeless flies, little plastic eyes. And the eyes are always tied on the top of the hook shank, so the fly rides up and doesn't get snagged on the bottom. So when I get on a flat, and let's say we're poling a flat, I'm fishing from the front of the boat, looking for bonefish. I take my fly and I toss it overboard, and I count how many seconds it takes to hit the bottom. And I don't do this just once, because every time you get to a new area, it's going to be a different current speed, a different depth, and just a different environment, and I want to recheck that statistic. So I always want to know how long it takes my fly to hit the bottom, because bonefish are bottom feeders for the most part. They might rise up and eat at mid-water column, but they're looking down. So oftentimes anglers who are using too light a fly let that fly hit the water, or it might be the properly weighted fly, but they strip it too early and it's not in the zone of where that fish is feeding on the bottom. The fish never sees the fly. And these fish are spooky. This fishing stinks. Well, you never got the fly in the zone. So know the depth of the water and how long it takes for that fly to hit the bottom. And lastly, you might be casting to an area that's a different depth of where you just threw that fly. So take into accountability. If it took 4 seconds to hit and it's 3 feet deep and you're casting in 2 feet of water, you don't have to wait as long.
Yeah. Well, along with the big book project that you're about to release, A Passion for Bonefish, you also have just released an accompanying book called My 100 Favorite Flies for Bonefish. And this was a really cool side project. It kind of came out as a complimentary addition to A Passion for Bonefish. This is a smaller photo book that showcases, well, obviously your 100 top bonefish patterns. Tell us a little bit about this book project and how this came about. Was this a byproduct of putting together the bigger book and then just saying, you know what, I'm talking so much about, effective bonefish flies that I'll put together a list of the top 100?
Yeah, it's kind of a precursor to, or piggybacks the big book. And this was Tom Perro's idea. I was shooting photos for the big book, a passion book anyways. And Tom, thought that it'd be kind of fun to do it. And you don't need 100 different type bonefish flies. It was overkill. It was actually kind of a struggle to find 100 bonefish flies. And so eventually we did, and we shot them all. I think the value in this book is having all the recipes for the wide variety of flies in one spot. And I'll tell you, I got to give it to Tom Perro. It took a lot of work to find who tied the fly, because I just would take a picture of the fly and tell him what I thought it was called. Well, oftentimes it was misnamed. And so the amount of time and dedication it took to find out who tied it and how to tie it, and the recipe, was a tremendous amount of work. So it's just a cool little guide on how to, what you need to tie specific flies.
Yeah, so anglers will love this book. Again, it's called My 100 Favorite Bonefish, 100 Favorite Flies for Bonefish. Anglers will love it, but tiers will really love it because it's got the recipes and everything they need. Well, that's one that people can also look for. It's out now. I want to move on from flies and talk a little bit about gear and equipment. What do you think is the recommended ideal rod weight for bonefish? And this is, it can vary. I get it, depending on, winds and size of fish and where you're fishing. But if you're, going out and saying, I'm going to buy my first setup for bonefish, my first rod and reel, what am I looking for?
Yeah, 9-foot 8 weight.
9-foot 8 weight.
I think is the proper rod.
And is that kind of the go-to setup that you personally use in most situations?
You bet. It has enough backbone to get through the wind. A lot of people for, areas that have smaller schooling bonefish like to go to a 6 weight. My problem with that is it takes too long to fight the fish. It's not conservation-wise. We'll talk about that a little later. But no, I just like the fightability of an 8 weight and the ability to throw a subtle cast in calm conditions and still battle pretty substantial winds.
Typically floating lines, or do you ever use intermediate lines with bonefish?
No, it's pretty much all floating line.
All floating tropical lines.
Yeah, and the reason is I would say almost 60 to 70% of the time, and maybe more when you're beginning, and your saltwater cast is still, in its working stage, is you're going to have to pick up that line and fly and represent it to a fish. So if the fish is, tailing at 10 o'clock, 40 feet, and you make a cast at 10:10 or 10:15, that fish is not going to see that fly, and you have to pick it up subtly and quietly and replace it in the zone where the fish is feeding. And a sinking line will just make way too much noise when you pick it up and lay it back down. And a good floating line with a proper technique of reaching out and doing a single subtle haul when you pick up that line out of the water to represent it in one shot, which you should practice a lot at home, is key. And so a floating line can do that.
Well, I know this varies by situation and fish behavior, Ian, but in general, what length of leader and size of tippet is common for most flat fishing situations for bonefish?
Yeah, 9 to 10 foot, 15 or 16 pound leader is your go-to. I'm more of a fluorocarbon person because it's more abrasion resistant, sinks a little faster, and doesn't reflect as much light. A lot of folks like a mono butt section because it's a little easier to pick up because it floats a little higher in the water column. But I think the key to leaders is being able to adjust them based on current conditions. You want a shorter, stouter leader when it's windy, and you want a longer, more subtle leader when it's calm.
Yeah, and always the ability to adjust that tippet size as well. Sometimes it might be 12 pound, oftentimes it's 16. If you're fishing in an area with deeper water, bigger fish, and lots of debris on the flats, you might even bump up to a 20 pound. Yeah. But important to be able to adjust that. So rods, fly lines, leaders, we've talked about that. Any thoughts when it comes to clothing for flats fishing? I mean, am I wearing a neon one-piece set of coveralls out there? Or what are your thoughts when it comes to what bonefish see and what you should be wearing as an angler?
Yeah, you want to be like what bonefish eat. You want to use camouflage, and that's lighter, natural colors. Particularly on andros in the summer when the doctor flies are out, you wear a dark green shirt, you're in trouble, man. You want to wear light colors. I also like quick drying materials, which is, it's everywhere nowadays. So, light white, tan, light olive, I think are the best colors. Quick drying, and we all want to wear shorts in February when we live in the north and go to warm environments, but you can get burned by the sun. So I'm not a big sunblock person. I like clothes that cover me. I like the buff, sunglasses if I need to, and a hat that covers me. I want to keep that sunblock off my hands, because you apply a bunch of creamy sunblock and I guarantee you the biggest fish of the trip is coming down the pipe and your hands are all gooped up. So I typically cover up, put a little sunblock on in the morning, wash my hands, and then if I need to reapply sunblock, I use a environmentally conscious spray so I don't have to get it on the underside of my hands. But again, I usually don't have to use sunblock too much because I'm covered up.
Yeah. Other important pieces of gear. I mean, we've talked to the importance of sunglasses, obviously, in spotting fish, rods, reels, leaders. We've talked about flies. Other key pieces of equipment when you're going bone fishing.
Yeah, again, this is a podcast in itself, but for me, being able to access things quickly is paramount, and it's down to my boat bag, which is also my carry-on, a waterproof backpack, and I like a roll top because it's bigger and easier to get into, and I like stuff sacks inside of it, so everything's broken down and easily accessible by category. And then I like exterior tippet holders with 30, 20, 16, my go-to tippets. So when I'm adjusting my leader, I don't have to even go into my backpack. And then I like a fly patch. They got these new magnetic ones, which are super cool. Or just on my wading pack, when I'm wading, I'll just get some foam and wrap it around this shoulder strap, or your hat. The hats are a little tough, or you can glue foam onto the top of your hat. But being able to access stuff quickly is really important.
Yeah, having the right pack system for in the boat for organization, no doubt. Well, I want to pivot and talk a little bit about destinations, some of your top bone fishing locations, Ian. Now, you've been all over the world chasing bonefish. You've certainly fished most of the great locations over the years. And again, we could talk for hours about where to go, what the great bonefish destinations are. But what are some of your favorite destinations when it comes to productivity, consistency, and action for bonefish? What do you have at the top of the list?
Where I'm going next.
There you go.
That's the stock answer.
Yeah.
No, I am again, it's the people that bring me back to destinations and my old friends. But from a purely fishing standpoint for bonefish, I like protected areas. Countries that have taken the time to understand and value their renewable resource in catch and release angling is where I want to go. I want to demonstrate financially that I appreciate their efforts as a government and as a whole, and the outfitters, guides, and people, that they're protecting their fisheries. So, Turnip Atoll Trust, catch and release now for the big three in Belize, Ascension, Spiritu Santo is a protected park. Cuba, of all places, has been doing this for over a decade, and we can't figure that out in a lot of our fisheries, yet Cuba can. I mean, come on, man. So, I like to go to places where I know the fish aren't being netted. I was on a specific island this past winter, and I was with Chris Patterson, our cinematographer, and we were, doing some filming work, and we had tough fishing all week, and we finally had some sun, and I was so excited. And we had an incoming tide, and we were entering the flat and dry white sand and waiting for the tide to come in, and I was so psyched to get Chris some material to use. And it's struggling all week, and I'm rigging up, and I look over my left shoulder, and there's a big net tangled up in the mangroves. And I looked down the beach and there's a couple locals hand lining. And we didn't see any fish.
Yeah.
And this is in a place that shouldn't be doing that. And so, that stuff is localized. Bonefish are resident, so it doesn't affect the whole place, but it's still happening. And so we need to get out there and protect our fisheries.
Absolutely. Well, I know that for you personally, Ian, the Bahamas has played a large role in your evolution as a saltwater angler and as a bonefish angler. Talk to us a little bit about the role the Bahamas have played in general when it comes to the culture of bonefishing, as well as the development of fly fishing for bonefish over decades.
Yeah, like we talked about earlier, what initially we just got lucky, having a connection in the Bahamas and on Andros and having no money and being able to go there, on the snide. So that was lucky. But what it really metamorphosized into was the getting to know the guides and outfitters and lodge owners that were in the same position we were, starting off, and young businesses and developing their businesses, and how it evolved into actually what I do for a living. And I think that the welcoming nature of the Bahamas and its proximity to the United States make it such a wonderful place to visit. And there was no language barrier. 20 years ago, you'd go to some spots and you couldn't talk to the guide. So you weren't capturing a lot of valuable information, which strengthened your foundation in saltwater angling. And so in the Bahamas, you really got to learn, and you still do. And there's no pressure. The guides aren't yelling at you. They're not demeaning you if you blow a shot. More fish coming, man. They're so chill and wonderful to be with. And whether it's, on Grand Bahama or Andros, or Abaco or any of the islands, everybody just welcomes you with open arms. And I love conch salad,
Yeah, the best in the world is in the Bahamas, no doubt.
Yeah,
no doubt.
If I could be anywhere, it'd be hitting golf balls at Shines on Mangrove Key.
Yeah, after a productive
salad.
Day on the flats, you
yeah,
go
or
right
not.
to Shines.
Yeah, or not.
Yeah. Right on. Well, for those that are maybe thinking about their first bonefish trip, or they're fairly new to chasing bones, give us a couple quick destinations they should consider.
Yeah, you want a place where you can fish optimal tides throughout the day. A lot of us can only get away for 3 to 5 days. And so you don't want to go when it's high tide in the mid part of the day, and that's the only tide you're going to come across. So do your research and find a spot where you can fish optimal tides throughout the day, which is going to maximize your financial commitment to that destination. And also a place that has a good plan B. If the weather goes to heck and you're struggling, you want to go do something where you can, at least cast and see a fish. And I'll say, all the big destinations, whether it's Christmas or the Seychelles or the Bahamas, Belize, Mexico, all these wonderful flats destinations, they all have those type settings where you have a good plan B and you can kind of focus on optimal tides.
So really it's as much about the guides and the infrastructure as it is about the fishery. Going to a place where there's a plan, whether the weather is cooperating or it's downright tough. You want to be fishing somewhere where you have that plan B as far as being out for a long day on the water, where the guides are going to be able to pull something out of their hat and still deliver a meaningful experience.
Yeah, there are a lot of small fisheries that are very condensed, and you're at the mercy of that place. And if it's blowing 25, it's unsafe to go fishing.
Yeah.
That might be a bucket list place down the road because you haven't fished there and they've got big fish. And you've caught enough fish that you're okay with, you got to wait it out a little bit. But when you're new to the sport and you're eager, you want to go to a place where you're going to be able to angle no matter what the weather's doing.
Yeah. Well, what should I consider when planning a bone fishing trip abroad? What are some of the key things? Are there logistics and details that are all too frequently overlooked when people are planning or selecting a lodge? What are some of the key considerations? I love what you said a moment ago about, go to a place that values their bone fishing or their saltwater resources, that have gone to great lengths to, protect those resources, protect those species. What are some of the other key considerations when selecting a destination?
Again, the bellwether answer is when you can go. A lot of these fisheries are year round. And so when you can find the time to go, you should go. And what's cool is a lot of these places, have availability during odd times of the year and the old phrase last minute booking. And so, you get a little window of opportunity that pops up. There's typically a fishery that's pretty close to you. Whether you're in Texas or the West Coast, you can get down to Central America. Or if you're on the East Coast, I'm always jealous when we're at the New Jersey show and some guy could get to Nassau in 3 hours on a direct flight and hop over to one of the other islands in 10 minutes. You can watch the weather.
Yeah, and make that last minute decision.
Yeah. And so I think that, considering and planning a trip should be done well in advance. You're going to hedge the odds on getting that guide that's going to be best suited for you. There's no such thing as the best guide, the top fishy guide. It's about who is going to work with you the best at where you are in your career. So planning, I'm an 11-month person, because a lot of lodges are first right of refusal on current guests. So I'm thinking about my trip 18 months out. I'm committing, 11 and a half months out.
Yeah. Good advice there. Well, I want to close out with a few quick questions, Ian, about the future of bonefish and some of these ongoing conservation challenges in these fisheries around the world. This is a big question, but how do you think things are looking for bonefish globally these days as a species?
Well, when we look to the Florida Keys as a great example, their bonefish are on the rebound, and that's a great sign. And there are a lot of, groups like Bonefish Tarpon Trust that are doing a lot of great work, protecting those fish, whether it's water quality or, fishery management. And so we want to, look to, places like Cuba and Belize, like we talked about earlier, that have set that high standard for protecting their places before they get messed up. We didn't know any better in Florida 50, 60 years ago that a gazillion golf courses and sugar plantations would hurt fisheries 100 miles away. We had no idea, and now we know. So what's neat is a lot of these other countries can learn from our mistakes, and they have, and that's rewarding to see. And again, that's where I want to go.
So you're optimistic for a lot of these places.
I am very optimistic because I think we can learn a lot.
What do you think the everyday average angler can do, even in their own kind of small way, to protect bonefish habitat and ensure the future of bonefishing?
Yeah, you want to learn how to fight fish and fight them quickly. I know you want to use your 6-weight on a bonefish, but don't. Use an 8-weight that can fight that fish quickly. You want to, go for a pound test, 3-pound test record on a 6-pound bonefish. You're killing that fish, man. Even when you release it, it's a shark ate it 10 minutes down the road. Let's fight these fish quickly and properly. Hey, if you lose a fish or two because you're horsing them in, that's okay. We need to fight the fish quickly and land them quickly so when we release them, they've got energy to evade predators, because it happens, up to 20 to 30% of the time, unbeknownst to us. These fish swim off and over the horizon, poof, there's a big cloud of red that we never see with a shark tail hitting it. And then don't overhandle your bonefish. That protective slime on that fish. I mean, Jim, I hate to say it, back in the day, we used to handle a bonefish and put a handprint on our shirt because the scum would leave a handprint. We thought that was cool because, look how many fish I caught.
Oh, being a young angler, they didn't know any better back in the day.
Yeah, so protecting the quarry is the number one thing. Proper catch and release fishing methods. There's a ton of information on that. And then lastly, if you're fishing and you look behind you or the boat and there's 3 or 4 sharks, leave.
Yeah.
Don't catch that fish because it's Pavlov's dog.
Yeah.
Those sharks hear the engine. They know it's happening. They're waiting for you to hook up and eat your bonefish.
Yeah. And that happens all too frequently in places that do see regular angling pressure. So great advice. I think handling bonefish is, the right way is something that every angler should be aware of. And that includes taking photos of fish. I mean, 1, how many photos do you need? 2, if you're going to do it, do it right. Be ready, have your fishing partner ready with that camera. That fish lands, you get your hands wet, you quickly bring him out of the water, you get a couple shots, you put him back in, and off he goes. And better yet, think twice before photographing every single bonefish you catch or bringing him into the boat and setting it on your lap for a photo. Again, 20 years ago, people did it because nobody knew better. But now we do know better. We know about bonefish mortality rates. We know what it takes to, successfully release a bonefish where he's not going to get smoked by a shark or another predator right away. Do your part as an angler. It really does make a difference, especially, again, in these areas that see regular fishing pressure.
Yeah, hashtag keep them wet is a real deal.
That is the real deal. Well, Ian, this has been great. I know we could talk for hours more and go deeper into all of these topics that we touched on today, but thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and all that you've learned about bone fishing over these many years, over these decades of you chasing these species. I want you to wrap things up by telling listeners where they can find the new books, where they can order the new books, both the monumental project called A Passion for Bonefish, as well as the smaller book, My 100 Favorite Flies for Bonefish. How can people find these and where can they order them?
Yeah, if you're in Bozeman, Montana, you can stop by the Yellow Dog Fly Shop and pick up either copy. You can get it on our online store at yellowdogflyfishing.com, or you can go to Wild River Press and order it. And there's two different versions of A Passion for Bonefish. There's the standard copy, which is $125, which is a nice book. And then there's the upgraded version, which is quite a bit more, which is more of a collector's item where I did a little sketch of a bonefish and signed my name. And the majority of that money goes to mangrove restoration. So we'll be giving back on that collector's item. I think it's leather bound or something like that.
Nice. Well, congratulations again on the new project.
Thank you, Jim.
Very exciting, and I know we're all looking forward to seeing this out this July.
Yep, you bet.
That's great. Well, that is it for this episode of Waypoints. If you're considering a bonefish trip anywhere in the world, whether it's your first trip to the saltwater or your 100th trip, give us a call at Yellow Dog Fly Fishing. We have dozens of world-class bonefish offerings and destinations that include the Bahamas, Cuba, Belize, the Seychelles, Mexico, Honduras, Christmas Island, and several more locations in some of the wildest places on the planet. Be sure to visit yellowdogflyfishing.com to plan and research trips, source gear, equipment, and flies for your next destination, and stay up to date and dialed in on the latest news in fly fishing travel and adventure. Join us for our next episode, and remember, get out there, fish hard, and explore the world, because in the end, no one ever regretted a life of adventure.
This has been another episode of Waypoints, the podcast of fly fishing travel and adventure angling. Waypoints is produced by Brian Gregson and written by Jim Klug. Music is written and provided by bluegrass legend Woody Platt. Audio engineered by Sean McCormick. Visit yellowdogflyfishing.com for more location profiles, destination information, travel news, and the industry's best selection of flies and equipment for destination angling.